I'm here with Martha Jarvis, who is the permanent representative of the Anglican Communion to the United Nations. I thought I would just ask her to briefly describe her role.
So I have the real privilege of representing this incredible family of churches at the United Nations. And I work with colleagues in Geneva and Nairobi, and I travel myself to visit partners in New York. And our role together is to build a bridge between the Anglican Communion and the UN. And that bridge is about making sure that the church's voice is heard in issues that the UN is working on, issues that affect the day-to-day lives of Anglicans around the world, whether they are dealing with issues of injustice in their country or injustice that can be dealt with along themes that matter globally. So gender justice, poverty, freedom of religion and belief, Indigenous rights. The church's voice matters and it affects the church, so we speak about those in UN forums. We also mobilise the communion based on issues that the UN is raising and that the UN convenes the world's countries around. So the UN brings together, like we're talking about today, the world's largest climate change negotiations. And so we have part of the privilege of mobilising the communion to respond to issues of climate change. And that would also be true in how we relate to Indigenous peoples around the world, and using a UN framework of rights to guide some of the minimum standards that we should meet as faith communities and hopefully excel. And all of that is really aiming in some places at partnership, where the church brings a lot that the UN doesn't have, but also the UN can provide resourcing and scale and expertise that is really valuable to the church.
How do you experience raising issues around economic power and practice in and through your work as an Anglican at the UN?
So I think it is a difficult agenda for faith to bring to the table, because we bring much longer timescales than a lot of governments and a lot of businesses will be working to. So governments working to the next election cycle, businesses working to provide a return for their shareholders. And so part of our hope is to bring a voice into those conversations that is about the longer term impact of injustice and ignoring human dignity, which ultimately has an impact on politics, has a negative impact on politicians who ignore those issues, and a negative impact on profit lines. And you've seen that in places where, for example, extractives companies have gone in and disrupted local communities and contributed to some causes of conflict, and then have had to scale back their operations. So that is part of what we can bring as a voice of justice and faith and a longer term perspective of human value to the table. What we can also do is get practical in terms of our influence and our convening power as church. So, for example, the Church of England Pensions Board works on an initiative where it has convened multiple pensions boards representing billions of pounds, billions of dollars, to say, how can we support investment in emerging markets, particularly around green technology, that is the only way that we will be able to get a just transition from fossil fuels to clean energy. And at the moment, the financial systems that we have in place don't allow for easy investment in markets that are trying to grow and scale up their infrastructure. And so it's fallen to church ethical investors and other pensions boards to come together and say, how do we overcome some of these complexities? How can we be at the forefront of enabling that investment for the good of all? So we can do some things on the moral side, we can do some things on the practical side. I think we're probably strongest when we bring those two together.
What are your thoughts learning that the Pope will visit the COP meeting and Archbishop Welby will be there on behalf of the Anglican Communion and representatives from the Orthodox Church?
My thoughts are that the presence of these faith leaders shows that we're taking this matter seriously. It shows that we're giving it the importance that their time represents. And hopefully that is both in terms of practical action on the issue, but also the moral questions and the issues of injustice that underpin and that are continuing to drive climate change, the negative impacts, and the lack of progress in the negotiations. I hope that it is also an effort to bring voices to the table that are often forgotten in these negotiations, people who are directly impacted by climate change, who have lost lives and livelihoods because of it, Indigenous peoples who have lost land. The expectations that we all have of COP are huge. And I think we are right to be disappointed that we don't see global action meeting those expectations, because the problems are urgent and real. Something that we should take heart from is that these conferences are still happening. There is still a forum that brings together all of the world's countries to focus on this issue and to try to make change. And we need to keep the pressure on to hold all of those countries accountable to what they have already committed to the process and to ratchet up that ambition. And that won't be easy, and there'll be a lot of disappointments, but that's part of the voice of faith to say that there can be something that we can do together.